Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells, and I write horror, science fiction, and fantasy, and I review games on the internet. Today, I'm looking at D&D Monster Manual, and this review series that I've been doing, this is the first one that I've looked at that is not a core book. And so, I don't know what I'm going to say about it because I can't just describe the mechanics. I can't just tell you how neat the character sheet is. We have to look at the thing itself. So that's what we're going to do right now. Um, the Monster Manual is a classic. It is considered one of the core books that every dungeon master needs. If you're just a player, Player's Handbook is going to be it for you. But if you're a dungeon master, if you plan on running the game at any point, then kind of the triumvirate of books is Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. And the Monster Manual is exactly what it sounds like. It is essentially a shopping catalog of creatures for your characters to fight and interact with. This is what it looks like. Monster Manual, surprisingly like the other one that I've got up there. And it is 352 pages long. Precisely 13 of those pages are not monster stats. Everything else is pure monsters in it. What you get at the beginning is just kind of a how to read this book kind of a thing. Let's take a look at the Monster Manual itself. So here we go. Oh, this is when I was finding a thing to put in the deal for you, an image. Let's have a look right here at the Monster Manual. Okay, so this is looking at not a PDF, but at D&D Beyond. Monster Manual, bing, and it will load this for us. So we have our table of contents and so on, and we've got right at the beginning some very little stuff. Oh, that isn't even here. Oh, view introduction. There we go. So it's basically how to use this, how to do this, what is a monster. I think you can figure that out. Different ideas of what kind of things might be a dungeon for all kinds of different environments. If you're in a town and a city, then it could be an actual straight up dungeon with stone, or it could be a clock tower and people are working their way up to the top instead of down to the bottom. Things like that. Okay? And then it will say, this is how the monsters are laid out. You have statistics, you have the size categories, what the different types mean. What is an aberration? Well, this is what an aberration is, and so on. Skipping down even further, it does have a little thing here about how to modify the creatures. And some of them are specifically listed as variants or templates, and we can look at those, which will allow you to create your own monster later on, so that you can have a lot more than just what's in the book. If 339 pages of monsters is not enough for you, and we all know it's not enough for anyone. And then alignment. The D&D alignment system is ridiculous, but we still use it. How to read all of these things. One of the keys, if you know how to play the game, you already know what all this stuff is. But challenge rating is where we really need to take a look at this, because that is the single most important aspect, if you're a dungeon master, of designing an encounter, of coming up with stuff that your characters can fight and interact with, is the challenge rating. And it is, in my opinion, simultaneously one of the single best aspects of the D&D system, and also a very complicated. So buckle up. We're actually not going to get too deep into it, but like it says here, a monster's challenge rating will tell you how great of a threat that monster is, and that will allow you to put it together. And in the Dungeon Master's Guide, which we're going to look at later, there's the actual formula, and it's pages long, of how to calculate exactly how hard a given encounter or a given battle will be based on what the challenge ratings of the monsters are, how many of those monsters there are. It's not as simple as adding them all up. You have to do some multipliers and you have to do some other things. But the point is that you should be able to look at some monster stats and say, aha, now I know how hard this is going to be. That formula is, in the experience of most dungeon masters, kind of inherently flawed, but it is still incredibly valuable as a baseline to work from. And I think it's not so much that the formula is flawed as that the formula is not tailored to your specific group of players. So you know your players better than the game designers do. They give you this broad outline to work with and say, this is approximately how difficult it is. And then you can look at that and go, okay, in that case, I know exactly how to tweak it to make it harder or easier so that my players can handle it. Or so that it gives my players an appropriate challenge, I guess is the better way of phrasing that. Experience points, if you use experience points, my group just does the milestones. And then some other things, blah, blah, here we go. And that's it. Here you get down to also some descriptions of how there's some of the powers you can only use once a day, some powers that recharge maybe after you use them, and etc. And then legendary creatures and lairs. Legendary creatures, I think, may have existed in previous versions of Dungeons and Dragons. Lairs, I am fairly certain, are a brand new innovation of 5th edition. I might be wrong about both of those, but the point is that they're both a great way of making a monster harder or more challenging without just making its hit points bigger or increasing the damage that it does. What a legendary creature does is it has access to legendary actions. And whatever it does as its normal action, as its normal attack and move and so on, it also gets legendary actions that it can do on top of that. And these things just basically allow it to act multiple times during a round so that, one big dragon can be a threat to 5 or 6 players because it can be hitting multiple people, or it can be breathing fire, or it can be shielding itself, and all these extra things. Lair actions are my favorite part of this, although low-level players are probably never going to run into one because typically they show up for the most powerful monsters. It's not entirely true, but anyway, what lair actions do, again, just like legendary actions, lair actions give your monster extra stuff it can do. And this is usually very broad. A lair action comes with a monster that has a lair. So you go down into the depths of the ocean, you're going to fight an aboleth, and then while you're down there, while you're inside of the aboleth's home, its lair, then it has extra stuff that it can do. So it can say, for example, I am going to make everyone get sucked into these pools of water. And so while the monster is fighting and while the characters are fighting, the lair itself is also actively harming or hampering the efforts of the players. And so lair actions are a great new innovation, and I love them. Anyway, so that is the introduction. Let's take a look at the monsters themselves, okay? Where did you go? Oh, that's not what I want. Monster manual. Okay, so let's look at a very basic monster first, okay? We're going to take a look at a dryad. There you go. So, if this were purely stats, I don't think it would be very interesting because so many of these monsters would essentially be identical, Here's my hit points, here's my speed, I can see in the dark, I hit you with my claws or my sword or my bow or whatever, and that's kind of a solid 50% of the monsters in here. What makes them more interesting than that is this section here, where it gives their powers and it gives a description of what they can do, okay? And actually, I said that it gives you powers. This doesn't give you anything. This just describes, this is what the thing is like. This is how it interacts with the world, okay? The powers that it has are all further down here. And, this is where you can see, oh, it has the armor class. It has the hit points. We know what it's going to do. We can see its actions. If it decides to attack, it'll hit you with a club. More likely, it will just charm you so that you don't hit it. Here it has its resistances, and it's able to step through trees and cast these spells. Okay, so those are all the things that it can do if you get into a fight with it. But this part, this is the key that makes the Monster Manual such a great resource. Is yes, if you get into a fight with a Dryad, we know how to deal with it. But before that fight, or after that fight, or instead of that fight, you can just talk to it. You can use it in other ways. It can be hunting your characters through the woods, or you can be hunting, your characters can be hunting it through the woods. Okay? Because there's all of this kind of flavorful information that explains where it comes from and what it does, and turns this into much more than just a straight up catalog of monsters. So, like the fact that they are come from trees, that they might be bound to specific trees, like that is what starts to suggest story ideas, right? Now, let's look at something that is a little more complicated. Okay, let's look at dragons, which is arguably the most complicated monster in here because there are so many variants. Dragons can be different sizes, they can be different ages, they can be different colors, they can have all of these extra things. But the game's named after them, and so there needs to be a ton of different options of how to deal with that. And so you get in here and it starts describing them, and then it will have a variant. We talked about variants. Here's one. You can have a straight up dragon that eats people, or you can have a spellcaster dragon that casts spells and then eats people. Then we have all of this kind of flavorful information that we were talking about with the Dryad. What are they like? What do they do? What do they want out of the world? What kinds of stories can you tell about them? And then we start getting into specific descriptions. The Black Dragon is X, and this is what the Black Dragon does, and these are all the Black Dragon's things. And then here are those legendary actions that it has. So in addition to its normal thing, it gets to take 3 legendary actions on its turn, and sometimes, like this wing attack, it costs 2 of those. So it's going to eat you, right? It can use acid breath, or it can hit you with its tail or its claw, or bite you. It multi-attack lets it use Frightful Presence and then attack 3 times. And then, in addition to those 3 attacks and Frightful Presence, it gets 3 legendary actions, which might be an extra wing attack and then a tail attack. Or it might be a wing attack and a detect, or it might be 2 tail attacks and a detect, or it might just be 3 tail attacks. However you decide to spend those legendary actions, that's everything that this dragon can do in a single turn. And it is challenge rating 21, which means that it is harder to defeat than, or rather that it will represent a significant challenge even to a level 20 character, which is the highest that characters can go, at least for now. So that's what the legendary actions do, is they allow you to do all this extra scary, nasty stuff. And that's an ancient one. If you want one that is slightly younger than that, then here's the adult, which has very similar powers that are slightly less threatening, and it's only challenge rating 14. So you see, it's got all of these different variants. There's the young version. There's the little baby version that's only challenge rating, 2? And so at every level of your characters, you can throw dragons at them, and you can throw all these extra things. And then we're going to talk about lairs, okay? These are what the lair actions do. So they're not even on the dragon's turn. The lair is like an extra monster in the fight, okay? In this particular case, the black dragon, pools of water can grab people and drag them in. A cloud of swarming insects can go out and obscure the area and then poison everybody with little tiny bug bites. Or the black dragon can spread a magical darkness through everything, and unless you have even creatures with dark vision can't see through it, and so on and so on. So that's kind of how the thing works. It allows you to present an interesting encounter Or, you know, you can just go back to all those things before, and maybe you want to have an ancient black dragon be like the ultimate bad guy in your campaign, which they're going to fight when they eventually get up to level 20. Well, then here's all of this extra information about dragons that you can use to say, well, okay, this is what it will be like when they encounter the thing early on. And that's just the black dragon. Then it has all of that same information just for blue dragons and for all these other kinds of dragons and so on. Okay, let's look at the template. Shadow Dragon is one that has a template because, like I said, you can have variations. And the variant, we saw there's a spellcaster variant for the dragon. Shadow Dragon is a thing that can be on its own, or you can use it as a template right here to modify a dragon. So there can be yet more different kinds of dragons. And the Shadow Dragon template, Dungeons & Dragons has different planes of existence. There's the material plane where most of the characters live, and then there's things like the Feywild and the Shadowfell. Well, the Shadowfell, if a dragon spends enough time there, then it can turn into a Shadow Dragon, which is when you would apply this template to it. And all of a sudden, instead of dealing, for example, its normal kind of damage, it's doing necrotic damage. And instead of having its normal breath weapon, well, now it has this different breath weapon that deals necrotic damage and does some other stuff and can raise new shadows from the dead and things like that. So the templates are a really fun way of, you know, modifying what's already there. And we've spent a lot of time on dragons, but like I said, there is so much other stuff. This is just the D's. Do you want to look at... and when this doesn't even have drow. Where's the drow? I don't see them, but here's a drider. So the drider, you know, it's got this normal thing here, and it describes, you know, where a drider comes from, how a drider comes to exist. There's a spellcasting variant of it, and then here's all the powers, and there's a cool picture. And if you read through this, you can see that the drider is actually it's a drow, which is like an evil underground elf that has been cursed in some way. It has been turned into a monster, like a spider centaur, essentially, as you can see in the picture. And the fact that it probably is not happy to be one now can suggest more story opportunities. Maybe this is a thing that is just going to be a straight-up killer and is going to attack your players, and they're going to have to deal with it, and because it's so angry at its horrible existence. Or maybe if you can find some magical means of turning it back into a drow, well, you might be able to convince this drider to help you with something or whatever. And so, not that that will work for every single encounter with a drider, but just trying to show all of this flavor information at the beginning is there to suggest cool stories about stuff, right? And it's awesome. So let's go all the way back up to the top here. Like I said, I'm using D&D Beyond rather than a PDF. And one of the amazing things that D&D Beyond has is the encounter builder. The challenge ratings can be very hard to calculate, but the encounter builder on D&D Beyond does all of the math for you, and it's awesome. And so and a lot of D&D Beyond can be used for free. A lot of it does require, a buy-in of some kind, that you will have to buy each book individually in order to use it. And so if you bought the monster manual through D&D Beyond, then you would be able to do this. You name your encounter something, and we'll just say, fighting some ogres. Okay, that's a stupid name for an encounter, but that's what I'm going to go with for now. Then you set your number of characters, 5. Your average party level, 5. So 5 5th level characters. We'll tweak that just so you can see what we're going to do. You actually only have 4 characters, and they're all level 3. Okay? Done. Now, we need to put some ogres into this fight. There's our ogre. Let's turn that back. So, how many ogres? We're going to add 1. And over here, it's just said, okay, for 4 level 3 characters, An easy fight will have approximately 300 XP, medium 6, hard 9, deadly 1600, etc. Okay? And this thing is 450, so it is in the easy range. It hasn't got to medium yet. If we have 2 of them, it jumps up way higher, because each one is 450, which would normally be 900, but we have to multiply it because there's 2 of them, which means they have extra attacks. Remember what I said about how it was kind of a weird system? Well, this is what's going on. But this thing did all that math for us. So that now we know our party of 4 level 3 characters, if they fight 2 ogres, it's going to be a hard encounter. What does hard mean? What is a hard encounter? It could go badly for the adventurers. Weaker characters might get taken out of the fight, and there's a slim chance that 1 or more characters might die. What about if we boost this up into deadly? There's 3 ogres now. Well, could be lethal for 1 or more player characters. Survival often requires good tactics and quick thinking, and the party risks defeat. So let's make this more interesting. Drop it back down so there's only 1. But instead of just a normal ogre, we also want to have this ogre chain brute. He's challenge rating 3. We're going to toss him into that fight. Now, he's already tougher than this guy, and so all by himself, just the 2 of them, makes this into a deadly encounter. Okay? Or we could take that guy out and say, let's actually remove that guy as well and throw 2 half-ogres in there. We could add a lot of half-ogres before it gets ridiculous. Okay? So this lets you play around, and it lets you do all kinds of stuff. Now, if you are not ready to take the plunge on D&D Beyond, then I want to introduce you to another website, which is called Kobold Fight Club. Kobold Fight Club. Look that up because it's totally free. And while it doesn't give you the stats, they obviously don't have the license to give you all of the stat information that D&D Beyond has. All of this kind of stuff. If you have the monster manual and you just need help calculating challenge ratings for encounters, Kobold Fight Club can do that for you, and it's awesome. Another thing Kobold Fight Club can do, which is great, is just build a random encounter for you, which D&D Beyond doesn't do. And so maybe you know exactly what you want, and we can search for the ogres. And then we have, aha, here's the ogres. There's only 3 ogres in the basic monster manual. A lot of the other stuff I was looking at was from other supplements. Or you can just say, you know what? Give me an encounter. Let's make it hard. And it says, well, okay, let's go back to the same thing. 4 level 3 characters. Give me a hard encounter. Well, okay, a giant seahorse, a giant spider, and a shadow. That doesn't make a ton of sense. Oh, and there's actually 2 giant seahorses. When would you be encountering both a spider and a seahorse at the same time? So you can say, I don't want this seahorse, so now I have 1 spider, 1 shadow, and 2 swarms of insects. Well, okay, now we're getting somewhere. I can see how this would work. I can see how this would fit together. And you can set these. Let's say that we want to do an underground thing or an underwater thing. Aquatic. Okay? Well, let's give us a hard aquatic thing. 8 giant frogs. Or 2 crocodiles and 2 sawagin, which are like the deep ones from Cthulhu. And so all these filters will let you set the parameters of the encounter, and then Kobold Fight Club can fill in all those details for you. And it will do the same thing down here in terms of how it's calculated. So the adjusted XP is 800. Well, what if we want to make that tougher? What if we want an extra thing? Oh, I actually took one away. There, an extra sawagin. Then all of a sudden this became, if we keep bumping it up, 5 sawagin takes us over the line into deadly. So it does all these calculations for you, and that's great. The D&D Monster Manual is, while there are certainly aspects of it that I find less than helpful, it is indispensable, and it still is incredibly useful. like I said, the challenge rating thing, while it is not always exact, and while it doesn't always predict exactly how hard an encounter is going to be for your group, it is a fantastic guideline and baseline to start from to help you build an encounter. So we'll go back to the monster manual and say, this is great stuff. And the sheer variety of monsters that are in here is incredible. The ability to look through this, and then also you can look at the index at the end. You know, it's only a couple of pages, but there's an index in the back, which will let you, you know, find everything very easily. So if you are playing Dungeons and Dragons and you're a DM, I assume you already have this because it is that indispensable. If not, definitely look it up and to grab a copy because the D&D Monster Manual is kind of the defining fantastic monster manual of its kind. So, awesome. Thank you very much for watching my video today. I hope that it has been helpful to you, and I hope that you go and check out the D&D Monster Manual. Bye!